The poetry is a beautiful way to capture some of life's hardest and most awesome moments because there's something about language that cuts through the noise and hits us in the guts. And today's guest is Kelly Watts, author of The Weeping Degree: How Astrology Shaped Me from Suicide, which is our book club book too. And she's here to share her journey with us. And my hope is that if someone out there is listening and is dealing with something dark and is contemplating suicide, or if this has been you in the past, perhaps our chat today can help you find a way out. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you, Laura. And I hope the same thing too. That was part of the purpose of writing the book. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, sure. So we've got to start with the title. I admit that when I started, well, even before I started reading the book, I didn't know what a weeping degree was. But the second part, how astrology saved me from suicide, hooked me. But can you tell us about how you settled upon your title?
Well, it's such an interesting title. And one of the things I love about astrology is there's all these great expressions in it. And years ago, when I was on the brink of despair, and I was suicidal in those days, I went to an astrologer thinking, well, I'll try something completely different. I was seeing a therapist, I believe, at the time, but I went to the astrologer and he told me the expression, the weeping degree. I learned it from
Ah,
him. And basically what he said to me was, your chart, it has some really huge challenges in it, but if you face them and stand up to them, they will transform your life. And what was so healing about that was the fact that someone was acknowledging that I was going through a hard time.
mm,
It's not like I was imagining it.
mm-hmm.
It truly was happening, but that there was hope. And the weeping degree, just to explain it to listeners, is an astrological term that refers to between the 28th and 30th degree in a house. So, we know the sky is round and we have 12 houses, and each one is divided into degrees from 1 to 30. So the 29th degree is considered the weeping degree, and it means the energy is moving out of that house. It's in its descent or demise or transformation, and it's the moment before something new and wonderful happens. So the 29th degree is said to be weeping because it's in its demise, although it's also, as I said, the brink of something new.
Mm-hmm. Now, how much did you know about astrology before you began writing your book?
Well, I've been seeing this astrologer who kind of became my friend for many, many years. And so I would say I'm kind of a lifelong student of astrology. I'm no expert by any means, but I found it very helpful at pivotal moments in my life. And it also gave me a sense of hope in the way that things change. The sky, there is an
Mm-hmm.
evolution that's happening in the earth. It gave me that conception that life is my life and everyone's life, the planet's life, the world's life is in a process of transformation, in a process of evolution and change always. And so therefore, anything painful we're experiencing will also pass. It
Mm-hmm.
will also transform. And so that gave me enormous hope.
Now, does anybody need to know about astrology to understand your book or benefit from it?
No, I don't think so. The astrological, each poem is written with an astrological signature, and they're based on basically on my own chart,
Mm-hmm.
but they really were just a jumping off point for various themes in my own life and various themes in the process of healing as a survivor. So you could take them away if you wanted to, but I wanted to uh, riff off that idea of the weeping degree, that we start out with something that causes us sorrow, and as we engage with it and heal with it, it can transform into a gift. And that was really the theme of the book. I mean, the book is about a trauma, the history or her story, you could say, of a trauma, and how it transforms through time from a wound to a gift.
And what moved you to write this collection of poetry and prose and share it? Because I get that the writing part, I think it's cathartic. But then to share something, especially something so vulnerable with the world, I think takes a level of guts that most of us don't have.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting process. I started writing the book during the pandemic,
Mm.
and I think there were a couple of things that were happening there. I hadn't been writing poetry for a really long time. I'd been writing fiction and nonfiction, and originally this book, I had the title idea, The Weeping Degree, and I wanted to write a nonfiction book about my process of healing, and it just never came together. I could never
Mm.
make it work. I kept putting it aside for years and pulling it out, putting it aside, pulling it out. And my astrologer friend, Michael Zezas, said, "Hey, Kelly, you have the signature of the poet in your chart. If you ever wanted to turn your hand to that, you might find that the words flow more easily." And of course, I didn't believe him. Whenever he says something nice to me, I don't believe him. But it was the pandemic, and so I started joining these various. I actually started studying with a woman named Judith Hill, who was an American poet, and taking courses with her. And the poetry groups were a wonderful, safe, healing, creative space to connect with people during a very, very difficult time. And I guess being in that space, thank you, Judith Hill, gave me some courage because I got feedback from the other writers. And that was enormously helpful. I think it's important for every writer. And the other thing is that people were dying. And
Yeah.
I realized, life is short, and maybe you need to say what you need to say and trust what comes through you and let go of the outcome. So that's really, I can thank the poetry group in many ways for giving me courage, and also the pandemic, I guess, in some sense too.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So I'm a trauma therapist, and I
Yes,
find astrology, yeah, incredibly
interesting.
helpful for understanding some clients. Now, everybody's not open to that, but if they bring it up first, then I'm happy to talk about it. And one of
Oh,
the things
interesting. I
that,
think that's
yeah, yeah.
great.
One of the places that I often look is Chiron, and your book mentions Chiron in the 10th house, so the wounded healer. Can you
Mm.
explain well, first, what is Chiron and how knowing about that placement helped you?
Excellent. Yeah. So Chiron is the wounded healer,
Mm-hmm.
and I forget the whole story of Chiron, but he's sent off to suffer his wounds. I think it's his leg that's wounded, and
Mm-hmm.
he's sent off to suffer his wounds while all his friends are partying and carrying on and involved in all kinds of debauchery. And he goes into a cave, and then he reemerges with all of these gifts and all these wisdom. And he turns during that time to study, and he studies astrology and I believe medicine and a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
different things. And he returns to the world with this knowledge. So Chiron in a chart is indicative of often the wound, but also the healing, the journey of healing. And the fact that it's in my 10th house, I think, suggests that the 10th house is often associated with career
Mm-hmm.
and things we do out in the world. So that was part of what the astrologer was saying to me. You've been given this pain, this wound, all this suffering. But if you embrace it rather than running away from it, it will become your gift. It will become your healing and your purpose in some way in this life.
So would you say that your chart served as kind of a template or a suggestion on how you might move through things?
Yes, yes. And it gave me some peace because I realized that, at that time when I first started my healing journey decades ago, people were saying things like this to survivors: just get over it.
Yeah.
It's the past. Put the
Mm-hmm.
past behind you. They didn't understand anything about trauma or
Yeah.
flashback or how trauma lives in the body and how we carry it on from generation to generation, and how violence of all forms resonates for a very long time through
Mm-hmm.
society. And that, in fact, by embracing our healing, I mean, I wonder if you felt this, but I had moments in my own healing journey where I felt like I was healing myself, I was healing my mother, I was
Mm.
healing my grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
all of these women who were my legacy or my history, my ancestors, they too had suffered trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So when we take on healing, our own healing journey, we heal not only ourselves, but everyone around us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
So your book is divided into three parts. The first part, Home for Little Girls, is the part about being taken away from your home and being in foster care.
Hmm.
And you talk about your young years and share some really rough history. And this is not the first time that I've heard a horror story like this, and
Yes,
that
I'm sure.
things are not said, but you say them with such language, the poetry. So the way in which you say it, it's brief, it's punchy, it's to the point. You don't say it, but you say it. So,
Good.
how did you find the words to say that? Because it is really it's word it's brevity, but it's
Mm.
so heavy with meaning, and it does hit you in the guts.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, good. I mean, thank you. I'm glad that it does hit you in the gut. I wanted that to be the case because, of course, that's what I feel like I've lived with, and many of us live with. But I also didn't want to totally re-traumatize other people. And in
Mm-hmm.
some ways, the
Mm-hmm.
poetry gave me permission, I think, to have a kind of distance from it. And the brevity was also a kind of protection. As for how I found the words, writing I think is intuitive and kind of
Mm-hmm.
mystical. I don't know. I really don't know. And I felt like that book was something that kind of worked itself through me. I just
Mm.
stepped back and let it happen. And yeah, I joined actually a course called Manuscript Clan with Judith Hill, and she said to us, okay, it was for people who had been collecting poems for years, and I'd been writing for years, but I hadn't been collecting poems for years. And I said, Judith, I have like an idea for a book, and I want to write it, but I haven't written the poems yet. And she said, just come, just do it. The Nike ad. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I thought she was ridiculously optimistic, but there was something about the timing, I
Mm-hmm.
think. And of course, I had help as well from editors and different things. And I often think, you write. I have several other books that are in drawers that have never been published, like many writers.
Mm-hmm.
And but you learn something as you're writing all those years, and maybe all of a sudden, all of those skills come together
Mm-hmm.
at a
Mm-hmm.
moment in time. But I can thank the muses really for that book. It was a really unusual experience for me writing it.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful, and I'm really glad that it's available for people because I don't know if you know the
Thank you.
book When Rabbit Howls, but
Oh yes, I've read it several times.
it's explicit and it's
Yes.
horrible and it's so hard to read. And I read it because I have clients who deal with that type of thing, and I wanted to understand. But it's so hard to read. And when
Yes.
I read your book, there was something about the way, I think it's because it's poetry. Poetry is feeling. It's not just words, it's not intellect. And I think we can get into our intellect about horrible things that happen, rationalize, zoom out. There was no way to zoom out from this. There was no way to zoom out from this. And I think, people do these things. And I think if you
Yes.
can't zoom out from it, you can't do it.
Hmm. Yes. Interesting.
I mean, I
Yes.
think it's kind of like,
Absolutely. People commit crimes, I think,
yeah,
often in a dissociated state.
yeah.
Yeah, they're triggered by something, they go on a mad tear. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point.
Hmm.
Well, thank you. I'm glad the poetry helped. I think it helped me. I think I couldn't face, writing there's a lot of things I leave out, as you said, and
Hmm.
because I think we know we can fill in the blanks.
Yeah,
But I also think that there's something with poetry because there's something sacred about writing poetry. And there's a real
absolutely.
movement right now of people, Kaveh Akbar and people embracing Mary Oliver, kind of um, poetry seen as a kind of sacred art or an alchemical art. It relies so much on metaphor
Hmm.
and language and imagery, but also, it's art on the page. You can do something on the page. Like I have one story about the I character is me as a child being driven, and the words ramble all across the page. I mean, there's something you can tell in the way you actually place the words on the page that tells a story as well. So there's a lot of things, the musicality, the sound, the
Hmm.
rhythm that you can use that I think evoke somewhat like music, a more emotional felt experience than just explaining something that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's very powerful.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, you share that you were involuntarily detained in a mental hospital after a suicide attempt. And I think
Yes.
every experience can teach us something, even horrible ones. What value did you get from that experience?
Oh, yeah, I had forgotten about. The poem is called The Funny Farm. And some of it was the great bonding with my so-called crazy sisters while I was there. But the basic thing I learned, I had attempted suicide earlier. And it's funny because my mind had actually merged these two events, but I'd had a suicide attempt when I was around 15 and aborted it. And so I was put in hospital and then I was sent home. And then I had a huge drunken fight with my mother, and she insisted the medics come and put me in hospital. And in Canada, once you're put in hospital, if you're deemed a risk to yourself, they can keep you for 30 days.
Oh, wow.
So I was kept for 30 days. And it was bizarre to me. The whole experience was really bizarre. And there's I think I read about this, there's always the person going down with the trolley down the halls with their squeaky shoes calling medication, and everybody's doped to the gills, really that's what they were. And there was lots of trade going on between, the people who were addicted to downers and the people who wanted cigarettes. And,
Wow.
so it was like completely corrupt. It really wasn't helping at all. People were spitting them out. And what I learned from the other women was that many of them kept going back. They were
Yeah.
often repeat,
Yeah.
and they didn't seem to heal. They didn't seem to get any better. And so I realized this route, the drugs, the psychiatry, old-fashioned psychiatry as it was then, was not going to work for me. It wasn't
Mm,
going to help. And that was an important lesson because it set me on a more alternative healing
mm,
path, which was helpful. And I often think, if you get to a place where the door is closed, don't keep knocking on the same door.
yeah.
Go to the one that's opening.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, some of these women had suffered terribly, and they
Mm,
continued to suffer. And what they seemed to me was kind of unconscious of why they were suffering
mm.
and dependent on the system and kind of abused by the system. I begged my parents not to give me electric shock therapy, and I'm
Thank God they didn't.
yes, yes, and they did listen. They did
Oh,
listen. They did
thank
not do
God.
that. Yeah, I know. So now, we have a very different view on all of that. But that at the time was the what do you call it? The process du jour.
Mm,
We knew very little about trauma in those days. It's really amazing to look back.
mm. So what
Yeah.
time period was this?
Well, let's see. It would have been the 1970s when
Okay.
I was in my teens. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I worked in a psych hospital. Thank God it was not like that.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. No, there was none of that. Nobody's doped to the gills. Thank God.
Yes,
I
exactly.
hope that's the common experience, not just the place I was at. Yeah, I don't think it's like that anymore.
Well, I think it's totally changed.
Yeah.
Now we've learned so many things. And, I don't want to disparage medication. I have lots of friends who have gone on it. And certainly as a temporary thing in an acute situation, it might be important. But
Sure.
that wasn't the route for me. And I'm glad I didn't take it.
Mm. Yeah.
And
You mentioned in the book that you began traveling at a really young age and spent some
mhm,
time in a monastery. And what attracted you
yes.
to that, and what was that like?
That was an amazing revelation and a real gift in my life. My parents, I was kind of a troubled child, so they wanted to send me off to school somewhere.
Mm.
And my mother had remarried. I had a stepfather who was a doctor, who was a kindly source in my life, like something quite positive after. I always say my early years were kind of in hell, and then I kind of graduated, suddenly found myself in heaven in India.
Mm.
And so they looked around for places for me to go to school because they wanted to make sure I graduated. And we had a family friend who had grown up at a missionary school in India. And so that's how I
Oh.
ended out there. And I had been studying, the reason why I agreed to go is I'd been studying alternative religions. I was always interested in different spiritual beliefs. And I was studying Hinduism and Buddhism. And so it was a kind of synchronicity of events that I met this person who had gone to school in India and then and was studying, Eastern traditions at that time. And so when school was finished, and I did finally graduate from American high school, I went to I actually, again, talk about synchronicity. It's one of my favorite words. I went to Delhi, India, and I was there. My passport went missing, or my money went missing. Something went missing, and I was stuck in a little guest house in Delhi, India. And I met someone who was on their way to a Buddhist monastery, and he said, I'm going to this Tibetan Buddhist monastery called Kopan. It's the most amazing place, and they have something called a 30-day retreat, and you go for 30 days and you turn off your phones and of course we didn't have phones in those days, but you couldn't answer the phone, you couldn't write letters, you couldn't you even had silent mornings, and you meditate every day, and after 30 days your mind will never be the same. I was like, hey, let's go. And this person actually helped me to go there. It was an incredible gift. And I
Wow.
did. And it's funny how, the passport or the money situation, whatever it was, got resolved shortly after that. So I
Huh.
really feel like I was meant to meet that person. I feel
Yeah.
very grateful to them. And I was blown away by Nepal. I was blown away by the Tibetan lamas, and I met my teacher there, Lama Yeshe, who was a lovely, round, jolly um, teacher who would say things, accuse us of having supermarket mind. That was hilarious. And I had never really understood what they meant by the idea of North American culture is so materialistic, but I kind of understood it in that context with that
Yeah.
sentence. And of course, what did I have to do for 30 days? I had to sit and listen to my thoughts and the voices inside my head, and the pictures inside my head. And it was devastating. I mean, it was very painful, but it made
Mm.
it very clear to me that I had emotional work to do, and
Mm.
also that this was the work, sitting with this and learning to transform it, and that running away from it, traveling from place to place, or, just running away from my past was never going to heal that. And I do think that discovering meditation at a young age really opened the door to memory for me. I'm not sure.
Mm.
I think many people go through life without ever really either, I don't know if you find this with your clients, they don't access early childhood trauma, or they avoid it in some kind of way. And I think the meditation created a kind of several things. It created a kind of sacred space, a sacred, safe space, and gave me some skills to deal with, the frightening images, the fears, and the feelings that were coming up, some kind of distance from them so that I could actually watch them without being totally, taken away in the torrent, which is what often happens.
Mm. Wow. Okay. So you wrote under survivor rules. Pray, dream, write, plead, and sob sincerely for what you need, and the universe will answer you in metaphors. I'm always talking about how the universe speaks in metaphors. So I'm really interested to hear what that means for you. And can you give us an example?
That's fantastic. The universe will answer you in metaphors. Yeah, I think that sometimes in my life, I've, prayed for things or wished for things and expected the literal answer, a literal answer. And I don't think that's how poetry works. And I don't think that's how the world works.
Agreed.
Yes, so I'm glad you like that expression. I'm trying to think of an exact example, and nothing's really coming to me right now. But that was what I meant by that. That
Hmm.
you know, well, for instance, we can use the India example. I was furious that my passport had gone. I can't remember whether it was money or passport. It might have been both. It had gone missing, and sulking in the guest house. That, I couldn't go on my adventure with my friends. And in the meantime, I meet someone who basically changes my life.
Hmm. Hmm.
So if I hadn't listened, if I hadn't gone to tea with him and spoken to him and been open, and I think this is one thing about the geographical cure and traveling is that sometimes we're more open when we're traveling than we are in our
Yeah.
regular life for what shows up.
Yeah.
And what shows up can often be so much better than anything we planned.
Hmm. Hmm.
And yeah, I've forgotten his name, John, I think it was, but I'm grateful to him. He was a
Hmm.
gift in life, in my life at that moment.
Do you seem to have a driving need to be heard? So in your book, you talked about that you sought out one of your abusers, which I was like, wow. You told the police, you talked to therapists, you spent time with survivors, and you wrote this book. Does telling your story help?
Yes, I think telling your story is part of reclaiming it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think storytelling is a part of every culture on earth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is what we do is tell our stories.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that happens too is that as you tell it, it starts to change.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a point too where, I got involved in activism for a period of time. And there was a point where I had to step away from it because I felt that I was re-triggering myself by
Yeah.
telling the story. And I needed to change the narrative to a happy ending. I needed to give myself some, and I think that that's what writing this book was for me, was to explore the gifts that the healing of the wound gave to me.
Yeah.
And in that way, embrace them, be thankful for them and integrate them.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point because if anybody's listening and they're like, "Oh, this I can't, if this is going to be too much, it's going to bring back my own stories." It does go through the three phases, so you do get to a happy ending. Yeah.
Yeah, as
Mm-hmm.
much as you can in life. It's not like life is always. I mean, I think when I entered therapy, I thought, "Oh, I'll do this for 2 years and I'll live happily ever after." It's like, no,
Yeah.
life is for learning. At least it has been for me. I think there's always something we're dealing with.
Yeah.
But yeah, telling your story, I think, can be very profound. And not everybody has to be a writer. There's lots of ways to do that. And yeah, there are these gifts that we can get from the process of healing for sure.
Hmm. Now, this wasn't in the book. I don't know where I saw this, but you walked the Camino de Santiago. Was that part of your healing journey? And if so, how did that help you?
Yes, that's probably on my website.
Oh, I think that might be where I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm.
And I did do a little book about the experience. It's actually just slogans and a description of the process I used. It was called Camino Meditations. And I walked in 2008, and my purpose of walking was to get sober.
Oh.
And I was both successful and unsuccessful, and then successful again. So I walked for 7 weeks, abstaining and meditating, walking in silence in the mornings. And it was wonderful. It was an amazing experience. Of course, you know what happens, the law of attraction, as you're walking. This is another example of the universe replying to you in metaphors. I started to meet all these other people who were, I called them my turtle tribe, and they were other meditators. We would just find each other.
Mm.
And sure enough, they would be dealing with something similar or going through something very thematically synchronous with whatever I was going through. And so there was a bunch of us, and we walked. There were often on the map, you had options of which way to walk. You could go by the road and the quickest way, or you could take
Mm.
the diversion. And we always took the diversion. We always took the longest route. I thought we spend all our lives rushing and
Yeah.
meeting deadlines and living in this crazy relationship with time. Here's an opportunity to step out of time and do something ancient and so human, just go walking. And it was really powerful. So it was my first experience of being free from alcohol for a long period of time, and I celebrated my arriving in Finisterre with warm champagne, and then had to start all over again.
That's funny.
So like a true addict. But yeah, but after that I did get sober. So it was also a gift, and the people I met on the road were a gift too.
Awesome. I think many people struggle with wanting to die. Some even
Yes.
take steps to end their own life. So there's a difference between thinking about it and planning to do it. And lots of people know people who succeeded. So as a
Yes.
survivor, what would you say to those people?
Mm. Yeah. It's such a painful place to be
Hmm.
in, to want to give away your own life. And I have had a close friend, actually an old boyfriend, who did do exactly that. And I know it's easy to say, but there's something that my therapist told me is that whenever we're in that very painful place, we're usually actually in the process of having feelings come up. They're often from the past, which is why they're so powerful, or from when we were really young and felt completely powerless. And she would always say to me, remember, they're just feelings. They're not actually facts. They're not, probably the worst has already happened. And as you accept them, the moment you accept whatever that dark, terrible feeling is, it begins to transform.
Hmm.
It's already changing. So it's hard to know that process and trust that process of feeling one's way through those darkest feelings, but that is the process. And I guess, I'll resort to a slogan for this, which is, this too shall pass. The
Hmm.
world in and of itself is always evolving. So even any great injustice that's taking place in the world, and there's always one, there's usually many, and we see them every day now, which is horrific, they too are changing. They too are evolving. And that helps me anyway, and come to peace with some of the, yeah, just the really, really difficult things we face in the world. And that moment, it's a moment, and
Yeah.
that moment will pass. It
Yeah.
will pass.
But if this sounds like your kind of book, this, like I said, was our book club selection for this month. Come
Thank you.
join
Thank you.
us. Yeah, talk about spiritual books with like minded people. And Kelly, thank you for writing the book and being with us here today. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Laura. And I want to tell people,
Oh,
please sign up for my newsletter at www.kellywatt.ca. I have all kinds of, I do a bunch of little mini reviews on spiritual books, different kinds of books, and also you can find out where I'm going to be reading and doing other things, other healing things.
awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And we will have that in the show notes.
Thank you so much, Laura, for having
Sure.
me.
And
And
see,
thank you for your show. It's such a great show. It's a really great, great glimpse onto a new world, right?
Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Spotify so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, why not show your love with a review? Thanks. See you next week.